So there's a popular custom of serving dairy in honor of the holiday of Shabuot. What is the origin of this custom, and to what extent was it practiced in the Middle East in general, and in Halab, Aleppo, Syria in particular? So the earliest record of serving dairy for Shabuot is in the 13th century. We find it documented in both France and Germany. The Kolbo, who was an authority who lived in France in the 13th century, wrote that it's customary to eat honey and milk on Shabuot because of a verse that we find in Shir HaShirim, the famous verse, Debash v'halab tahat leshonech, honey and milk under your tongue. So it's understood by commentators to allegorically be referring to one who's speaking words of Torah. Another source from 13th century France is Rabbi Abigdor HaSorfati, and he writes that the Torah itself alluded to the custom of eating dairy on Shabuot. There's a verse that says, Minha hadasha l'Adonai b'Shabuotechem, a new offering to God on your holiday of Shabuot. This is referring to the 2 wheat loaves of bread that were brought and waved in the Beit HaMikdash on the day of Shabuot. It's described as a new offering. And the acronym of the Pasuk, Hadasha Het Lashem Lamed B'Shabuotechem Bet, spells out halab, which is milk. The custom is also documented by the Rokeach, who was an authority in Germany also in the 13th century. Now, what's interesting is that the more popular reason for dairy on Shabuot, which was that they ate dairy after they received the Torah, because their dishes weren't kosher, they weren't able to slaughter, they didn't have a knife, they didn't have everything necessary to do it properly according to halakha. This reason was first documented in the 19th century. We find it in a Hasidic source, but there's no earlier source to support that narrative. Now, the earliest documentation for serving dairy on Shavuot amongst Middle Eastern authorities begins in the 17th century. It was documented by Rabbi Haim ben Beniste in Shiirei Knesset HaGedolah. He lived in Turkey. The Pri Hadash, also 17th century, who was originally from Italy, but he lived and taught in Yerushalayim, also documents the custom. But what we find in many sources is that they ate dairy foods before their meat lunch on the first day of Shabuot. This is what's written by the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Israelish, who was an authority in Poland in the 16th century. This was also the practice of Rabbi Haim ben Beniste, who we mentioned previously, and of Rabbi Haim Palachi, who was the chief rabbi of the Turkish Empire in the 19th century. Rabbi Abraham Hamwe, who was born in Halab in the 19th century, also emphasized the importance of eating meat on Shavuot. He wrote, after you eat dairy, make Birkat HaMazon, and then eat meat in honor of Yom Tov. And this was also the practice of Chavodia Yosef alav shalom. So we also find some communities that did not even serve dairy as a prelude to a meat meal, but rather it was just the breakfast after they stayed up and studied Torah all night. When they came home, they ate breakfast, they served dairy foods with honey, in honor of Devash v'Halab Tahat Leshonech. In Yemen, they didn't serve dairy at all on Shabuot. So what about the Syrian custom? So in Syria, it was customary to serve a dairy meal on Shabuot. The prevalent custom was the first night. Many had the custom to serve it on the first day instead. And although Harambam requires meat for all of the Yom Tov meals, Maran did not agree with Harambam on this point. He ruled that the meat was a requirement in the times of the Beit HaMikdash, when they had the korbanot, the shilamim, in honor of Yom Tov. But in our times that we don't have the korbanot, we can fulfill our obligation as Had Yom Tov by drinking wine. So yes, there are customary dairy foods amongst the Syrian community for Shabuot, the shtep calzones, the sambusak, the dairy sambusak. Furthermore, it was also customary to serve rizib halib, which is rice with milk, and the rizib asal, which is rice with honey, again, based on the pasuk, Debash v'halab tahad leshonech. Many also had the customary to serve krabij, which is a pastry with a marshmallow fluff. So the marshmallow fluff in Arabic is known as natif, and it's reminiscent of a verse that we read in the Mizmor in honor of Shabuot. The pasuk in Tehillim says, Af shamayim natifu. Ze Sinai, Natifu is reminiscent of Natif. So while it was customary to have one dairy meal, and if you drink wine with your meal, as we said, you fulfill your obligation of Simchat Yom Tov, of being happy on Yom Tov, according to Maran and Shulchan Aruch. We also see that according to most of the sources, dairy on Shabuot was not intended to replace an actual meal. It was either a prelude to a meat lunch, or it was just a breakfast, so it wasn't even together with a meal, and therefore the other three meals should all be meat meals. In that way, we fulfill our obligation, at least with the other meals, according to all the opinions, including Harambam, who, as we said, requires meat for all of the Yom Tov meals.